Nancy?
I only drove because I came from Perry Farm, not because I came from home.
I wouldn't have known one way or the other, so.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
Victor, how are you?
Well, we're hoping that Karen does show up.
I hope so.
Was she a maybe?
She said, when I sent her the agenda, just thank you. So that wasn't a no.
Yeah. I feel like I've spent a lot of time.
Here this week, in this room, planning commission meeting and
Certainly have.
council, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good meeting last night. Planning commission was good.
Had a long discussion though on the cottages. That was hard for, I guess, a lot of people to grasp, but because of the changes.
Well, and it was it needed to be written out, so there was a visual, because
Yeah.
I'm not super knowledgeable, but I'm pretty knowledgeable on zoning and setbacks, and I was like.
And that's the problem with it, is that they were changing their master deed.
Yeah.
Dana wants to know, do you have her muted? I believe the answer is yes.
I can ask her to unmute. She can choose to unmute herself. I don't know if I can unmute her myself. I can ask her to unmute. So I have asked her to unmute. Dana, can you hear us? Can you type in a yes or maybe say something?
Hi, Karen, how are you?
Good, I'm doing.
Hi, Karen.
Like Sue,
Huh?
how's it going, Nancy?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm busy, but I'm fine. Thank
Yeah,
you. It's
I know,
that
it's
time
one
of year.
day after another
Yeah,
today.
it is. It's just busy, busy. Let me shut my. We're happy you're here. We had to have you here. We'd be
Well, glad I
happy
could be
anyway,
here.
but I'm happy you're here.
Yeah, happy to be here myself. Crazy day.
Ken said he'd be right in, he's outside.
Oh, okay. I just texted him right now.
He was on the phone or something. He said he'd be right in, sorry.
No, it's all right.
Siren just went off.
It did, noon, walks in the door.
Let me just.
Oh, I didn't walk past that thing,
What's that?
the tree over there.
Oh, maybe on your way out.
Could do that.
So I don't know. Dana said she might be joining by audio, so.
What did she say?
I can't, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Dana, we can hear you
Okay.
now.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Dana.
Dana?
How's the road?
The road's good. We just stopped at a rest area downstate, and there were probably 40 people in line for COVID testing, so that may tell you a little how this is gonna go.
Yeah, oh dear.
That's scary.
Could be a long way.
Are
to
you in
Texas.
Claire?
Or Southeast. That's the one, that one also has testing.
I just, every time I come back from campus, the one in Claire's got a bunch of people there.
I wonder if it's
What, the
because it's
rest area?
free.
Yeah.
You know, that it's not people traveling necessarily, it's people who are
Yeah.
area residents and want to get a freebie,
Yeah,
which is, you know, good.
that's okay.
Say.
That makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Just wear your mask.
Yep.
Yep.
That's what we can do.
Swiss cheese, everybody.
I don't know if Savannah is coming, but we do have a quorum, so see whenever you want to. start.
Okay, I'll call this meeting to order. And first order of business is a roll call.
Sue Stewart,
Here.
Nancy Rondell,
Here.
Karen Stroh,
Here.
and we do have Dana Mulder joining us via Zoom. She's allowed to participate but cannot vote. I don't think we'll be voting, but that's what it is.
Send you a document.
Oh, yeah, and Ben Veling is here as staff consultant.
Well, there she is. In the car.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so meeting minutes from the October 15th meeting. Did anyone have comments, questions, corrections on these?
Nope, I thought they looked good.
Me too. I'll move we accept them as written.
I second.
Nancy moves, Karen seconds, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Vote passes, motion passes 3-0. Uncontroversial.
Good today.
Same topic.
Good group. Do we have any board communications?
I don't have anything other than Charles was really helpful with the article that we put in the tree light, sorry, the harbor light.
We can
Tree
rename
light.
it. That was good.
Patrick did email me to ask me if he could put illustrated by Patrick Wise, and Charles said, yes, that's absolutely okay, just to remind, he might forget, so that when we submit it, to have that written on there.
Okay,
That's
nice.
Otherwise, I think it was really nice that Charles did that, and we can always work on improving it, but Karen, you and Dana and Patrick as well, keep on working on articles. We don't need you can bring them to us, to me, when you're ready with one, and I'll just edit it and keep on plugging it in.
Yeah, I think that it was nice.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is time of the agenda, but I wanted to talk about what that next article, what the next topics might be.
Let's do that under
Yeah.
old business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have
Not
some
that, I mean,
ideas on that.
I'm being a little bit legalistic here because we have, but after that we have
New business.
public comment. And then on to old business, and this would be a good place to talk about, or did you have it under new business?
No, this would be a good place.
Old business, so let's talk about the,
Karen, over to you.
We have no
All
one from the
right.
I
public.
was just gonna say, is there public comment?
There's no one up there now.
Well, I did bring copies of, what you've seen before, but I'll give everyone a copy again about the topics we had kind of laid out. I try to jump over the table.
That's all right.
I can crawl under the table if I need to.
It's not worth that.
Sorry, Ben, I didn't have more, but I can give you my copy when I'm done. So, Victor, what do you think Charles's appetite is for the next timing for the article?
He indicated that one a month is fine, so I would
Okay.
imagine early December, having something to him is
All right.
good.
Okay, great.
And we'll let them decide which article in the month they would like, they have room to put it in, so.
Okay,
So we give it to them earlier in the month, they can decide,
Okay.
when.
Where they have room in the
Yeah,
paper for
great.
it.
So I thought since we're kind of still in this outreach phase, or AKA education, I thought that maybe the next topics could be the rights and responsibilities of property owners related to locations for new tree planting, how they're selected. So,
I mean, specific to city-owned trees.
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, I was.
So like when we pick
Okay.
places for new trees, how are those places selected? And then what are the rights and responsibilities of the property owners given that? So that's kind of my thought on the article. And then for the tree of the month, if Dana agrees, the conifer, Christmas, it's Christmas time. So maybe there's something related to Christmas trees or trees used for Christmas trees or whatever. So that's my thought on it.
That's-
And if you guys agree on that, I can go about writing something up and sharing it with Dana, and I have collaborated on it with Patrick. So.
I think that's a good idea, and I would definitely be, we'll definitely take a look to edit that, especially for the rights and responsibilities part.
Yeah.
There's, that's a good topic, just because a lot of people are confused about the right of way, especially if there's no sidewalk. They just, we had discussion at the IG, right?
Did you
Like,
see that on my
yeah, they
notes?
took down some trees,
They took
thinking
down
it's
some
the
trees.
land, but it's, this was a while ago, right? But so it's not a big deal right now. We gotta just move going forward, making sure that.
People realize
we're
they can't
educated.
do that.
Yeah,
I caught that last night.
yeah, I didn't say anything last night. I think, 'cause she
I
needed-
didn't either, but I almost did.
But, so I think that's a good topic.
Okay,
Good. And
Yep.
with regard to Christmas trees, this area has a lot of old plantations that were never harvested. I mean, there's a long history in this area of growing Christmas trees. And some of those efforts were successful, many were not. Still pretty easy to see on the landscape out in the country, places where people started a Christmas tree farm.
Yeah, like like a Bosma's type of place that didn't continue on like a Bosma.
Lots of, yeah,
Right.
and stands that are really big. Any comments on that, Ben? Any particular example you could pull out where people could?
Well, so some of those places that I think of are places that were abandoned by nurseries. So they weren't actually like, I can think of Hoffman and Matthews properties where they had like lots of Douglas firs that were planted in rows for harvest. And then like they weren't trendy anymore. So they stopped selling them and then sold the property. I think there was a Wells property off of Baster. They had like a lot of birch trees intermixed. And yeah, I mean, you see a lot of like red pine plantations, which are all straight and single rows, but those are much bigger than Christmas trees.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting topic. I think it'd be fun, the history of Christmas trees in our area and focus just on that practice as opposed to a specific tree this month, maybe.
Yeah, and it might be a good opportunity as well to talk about, and if it's not too much work, the tradition of the Christmas tree in the center of town, you know, with those comes from local places, you know.
Yeah, that's another good local mention.
And how one year we had a bucket truck flip over.
Trying to put that in.
So we decided to try to evade that liability.
And Victor, do you know where our tree is coming from and what kind it is this year?
Her name, I'm not pronouncing it right. Corinne Sovray.
Cyrus.
There you go, Cyrus.
Cyrus.
Yeah, Cyrus, is that how you pronounce it?
SIVRAIS.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. All right, she lives in Levering.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what kind of tree
She's
it
on the Harbor
is?
Springs side of Levering. She's on Valley Road.
I don't know the exact species. I know our electric department said it was a perfect fit, a perfect size.
Great.
I don't know the species though.
That
Well,
would be,
that could be a fun thing to note in the article is our tree this year, it came
That
from
would-
so-and-so in Levering and it is a blank, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
that would be a nice way to do tree of the month.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You could
Yeah.
see what kind it is and then
Yeah.
spin off from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
that'll be a tree of the
If
month.
you email me, Karen, as a reminder, I can ask the electric department what type of tree it is, if they know, or Ben can, I'm sure Ben will have a better idea than our electric line.
Yeah.
The
Should ask
species.
her.
I was gonna say, we can
Well,
ask
she
her.
may not know.
She
either.
may not know. It's a pine tree.
Bet it's
We all call-
It's
I
green.
call-
It's-
Anything with needles is a pine tree.
I bet it's a
Yes,
fir.
it's green too.
I was gonna say, or spruce. Spruce seem to be the ones that we plant in the
Mhm.
manhole pretty regularly.
Yeah,
That'd be a fun thing to do.
something
Yeah.
that
Perfect.
looks that pretty when it's field grown is usually a spruce or a fir. Not a red
I'll
pine, not a
email you
white
and
pine, not.
remind you to find out. We'll let you know, Dana. And then I'll take a stab at the first part of the article and then you can incorporate the tree of the month.
Sounds good?
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Easy peasy.
Thanks to you two. And Patrick.
Yes. And Patrick
And
and shoulder
Patrick.
surgery. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Who's gonna try to be here?
He was gonna try.
it's hard.
He may
I
not.
can relate to, not so much being in pain or incapacitated as having way too many things to manage that you never
Yeah.
realize you have to manage after the time spent. Oh
Well,
my gosh.
missing a limb too.
Yeah,
I mean, if you
yeah.
don't use one of your limbs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a while to develop your ambidextrous. Okay, so on to new business and the proposed tree maintenance and care budget. And I'd just like to, before Victor or Ben dives into this topic, mention that this attachment F1, especially the first sentence of the second paragraph that goes
Just lost audio. Just lost video. Got a bunch of bars.
I wanted a rough estimate.
I'm in more pain now.
Oh, Dana, can you still hear us?
Oh, you just came back.
Okay, you just came back, okay. So the reason I put this, I asked for this is because, of course, we're going to council for budget season, December 6th, and we do have to make some cuts to our budget, and we're also gonna be shifting things around in our budget. And I want to propose to council that we need to start shifting some of our priorities to maintaining what we already have. That's buildings, grounds, roads, streets, sidewalks, trees, anything that's the city owned, we need to start focusing on that because quite frankly, the long-term cost of avoiding that maintenance is higher. And it's not gonna be an easy budget discussion maybe on all of them, but it's something we have to do. So my goal is not to go to council and say, it costs $96,000 to take care of our trees, show me the money. But the goal is to say, here's our things, a rough breakdown of what it costs on these general topics. Tree board, city arborist, staff, we think that for this year, we would want to focus or shift some of our focus to maybe building up our inventory or maybe more training for staff, knowing that we can't do it all. As Ben will explain a little bit here, that first line item of $60,000, wages for trimming, training, and removal of trees, a lot of that is already being done. So we kind of took into consideration, how much money we're probably already spending on trees. And I'm going to guess probably at least $30,000 is already being spent on the trimming. If you count our electric department, probably a little bit more. But there probably needs to be more done. For example, one project we have going on is to be trimming the trees in the entrance of town by M119 by the skate park. There's very tall, skinny pine trees that are, if they could fall. And we want to try taking those trees down because of the utility interference that if they do fall in a big storm. And so that's a project that we're gonna have to look to in the future. Of course, consult Ben and, get a contract out for that if need be. But that's just one thing, one example of a higher cost tree removal, tree trimming thing that we have to do. So saying that, this might be an ideal annual budget, $96,000, but some years might be more because some years we might have to do some major replacements. Anyway, that's my goal. My goal is not to go to council and say, hey, we need all this money right now. It's say, hey, from a policy perspective, we think these things are the most important and we need to start shifting some money to there. I'll let now Ben probably just go over his report, just a general summary of why he thinks we need to head this direction. You can talk a little bit about the inventory, the 5-year plan, et cetera.
Yeah, basically the thought that I came up with was that, the 60 grand for trimming, that's stuff we're already doing. We're paying people in the Parks Department to, pick up fallen limbs, cut stuff that they can reach. If it's a small tree that's dead or something like that, they pull it out. One thing we're not doing is tracking what our removals are. So like if we take an inventory tree and remove it, it doesn't show up. So then we've got to find that later. So that should really be tied into what we're doing. We're already doing disease and pest control, probably to that number, maybe a little bit more if you include things like treating the lawns in some of the parks. And then dealing with some of the other things that we have, like weed control and invasives that are on the deer park and up by tourist park. And then also dealing with stuff like around the reservoir. We don't have any training or outreach that's funded right now. And that's actually something we can look for some grant money, at least a one-time appropriation from the state to train city employees or people that are interested in city trees for doing things like pruning. One of the biggest downgrades we have to our inventory numbers. So when we do an inventory, we also put a speculated value for what that tree is. So we come up with an absolute value like this. If this tree number 2 was perfect, it's worth this. In the condition that we view it on the day that we inventory it or update the inventory, it's worth something else. There's a difference. And a lot of times that comes from pruning damage. And so, people are managing for something other than, the best thing is for that tree and that devalues that resource. Some of that's just well-meaning people that don't understand how trees work. Sometimes it's for access, like we have to make sure that we don't have branches in front of stop signs or in the way of motorists or something like that. And sometimes, people have different ideas of what a good trimming job is. And so like talking to the city staff and or concerned people in, the public that may be interacting with those trees, it would be, I think, we'd be money ahead.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the value, since you're talking about value? In your first paragraph of text, where you talk about the value of the resource, I was confused because the value right above it is for the 96,000. Are you saying that that number is, the rationale for that number is the value of the city forest, or that number is the value of the city forest, or what?
So that's a good question. Generally in a private landscape, you would figure that the maintenance budget to take care of that landscape is roughly 10% of the value of that landscape. So $1 million landscape costs you $100,000 a year. In all avenues. And so like this number is actually much lower than what it would be, the value of the city inventory versus what this is much smaller.
So that's a good point to pick out for council.
Yeah, that we're 1/3 of what a homeowner would spend, on the bottom end of what they could spend. The other thing that I think I touched on is that we really only have an inventory for trees that are high profile in areas that are easily seen. So, as per earlier conversation with Victor, we don't have an inventory of the trees that are not between a sidewalk and the road if it's not in a park, and we don't have all the parks inventory.
We don't
So-
have Kiwanis Park. Because we have 3 digits of trees that we've already counted,
Yeah.
which doesn't include Kiwanis. So I'm still confused what the $5,000 means, because it seems like a really low number
You mean the number $5,000 for inventory?
for inventory.
So
Yeah.
that's the cost of
He
expensive.
hasn't got to that yet, but
Yeah, well, let's jump right in there.
yeah.
We usually update the inventory once every, several years. It's usually 5. And if this is an annual expenditure, that would give us in a 5-year period, $25,000. We'd increase the size of the inventory. So we could do a couple of things. We could update our records of what we have, and then we could add more trees to that inventory each time we do that cycle. I just broke it down into a smaller number in a smaller time frame.
So that, like, if we had 5 years worth of $25,000, you included 1 year at 5,000.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Over 5
that's,
years.
I have
It still seems like a small number to me, but, and that doesn't include the donated trees, or is
No, this is
donated
just the
trees is part
expense of doing the inventory.
That's just counting them.
Oh,
It's
doing the
expensive.
inventory.
Counting and
That's what I
assessing
missed.
the commission,
Gotcha.
et cetera.
Yeah,
Not
gotcha.
the trees.
Putting them in their location.
Yeah, that's-
Exactly.
So I have a question, and it's a really basic question, that's maybe because I don't get, why is it so important to know exactly what trees we have and their value? In terms of, from a council perspective,
Okay,
okay,
so
rather than
I
a
mean,
tree board, why is,
I agree with Nancy.
I just have a question, I don't know the answer to it, so, yeah, Ben.
Well, I mean, the biggest reason is exactly what we're talking about. Why would you spend $2 to maintain a tree that's worth $1? Right? But if you have a tree that's worth $1 million, it certainly makes a lot of sense to put a little bit of money into that. I mean, it's like buying a dog, right? The cheapest thing you can do is buy a dog. The vet bills, the maintenance, the feeding of the dog, that costs more than the dog, but the dog still has value.
so the value of the city's forest is an indication of what is needed to maintain that resource going forward.
Yeah, this is, I mean, if you have a house, you still have to do things like paint it and reshingle and maintain the property. This is a living entity, but it has definite value.
So here's another way to, tell me if this is right. If the basic inventory is just a count of how many stems there are in the city, that doesn't give you enough information about that resource to know how much you should spend on it, because a high value tree requires or justifies more spending than a low value tree. Is that why the value that we get from the inventory is important for planning purposes?
Oh, yeah, I mean, most
It just
definitely.
adds information.
And it also gives us indications too, like if we have a low value tree that's damaged and it's a high traffic area, then we can make decisions about management. So, if we have some pretty severe defects that can't be easily corrected, and the tree doesn't have a lot of benefit to the ecosystem, replacement, if replacement costs us $500 or $800, and the exposure that the city may have because of what happens when it fails, or what the maintenance costs might be, we can make all those determinations by the value. But it's like any other resource we're talking about. If we don't maintain a building, well, once that building works, do we just leave it and let it become,
Okay, I mean, that's helpful. I'm not judging. I just.
And then the other
I'd like
aspect-
I'd like to raise my hand at some point too. While you guys are talking, I can't tell when there's a good break.
We'll let you know, Dana, almost there.
So my concern with the cost of inventory and using the numbers, to get our percentage of money, to get our money we need to maintain it. When you compare that to a private individual who is probably going to maintain their property to the sculpted ultimate, I'm not sure we want to put the city in the position to also have to spend, to use that same percentage.
Yeah, and we're not using the same bar.
Okay.
I mean, and maybe I didn't clarify that, you know, as a rough rule of thumb, 10% is a reasonable amount for a private area, and we're well below that.
Okay, I mean, that's just a concern, knowing the financial constraints the city has.
The other thing we want to understand though too, is that we have a lot of interactions. I mean, 90% of the trees that are in an urban forest are on private property. But that extrapolation gets carried out in other ways though too. I mean, as per other comments, we have people that think that trees that belong to the public belong to them, and they make management decisions. Well, if somebody removes that tree, that's essentially taking city or public property. We can't just go after that tree is gone and say, well, we think it's worth this. Then we end up spending a lot of time and energy fighting in the court. When we have those trees in an inventory, we have a baseline for what they're worth. We have a very quick and easy way to deal with that problem. And because we have a history with that information, we can establish that we knew what it was worth instead of, what we don't want to do is go in front of a judge and say, well, we think it's worth $10,000, and that person says, oh, tree was dead, it was only worth $2, and I'll give you $3 for good measure. If we have that number already on the books as to what we value that tree at.
I'll give you a couple of good examples. One is, this was a private tree now, but just this past week, a private tree on the property fell on our Blackbird Museum back porch and damaged the porch. If we would have had a report, let's say that was a public tree, if we were, but even if it was a private tree, which it is, if we had a report detailing, this is the condition the tree was in, we had an inventory saying, it was in poor condition, that would give us notice that, hey, this could be a liability tree. We might want to remove it. We might want to do something with it. The second thing is, when I was living in Vermont and working for Milton there, and we were doing the tree inventory, it was a very good way for us to keep constant monitoring of any potential diseases that are coming in town. Because when you have a professional going around every year, taking a sampling of trees and to see their condition, he might notice, or she might notice trends of, all right, well, I see some diseases, I see some pests, I see something here. If we don't have that constant monitoring of checking out new locations or every 5 years of different sections of town, then we might miss that.
Well, and this is exactly, the reason we started inventorying trees is because the city of Petoskey, when Emerald Ash Borer showed up, they didn't have a count. Actually, they just got their first count of trees this last season. But so then the concern in Harbor Springs was, actually Fred Guter approached me and said, well, how many ash trees do we have? And I said, well, if we don't have a count, we don't know. And we were lucky. We had less than 5% ash trees in our inventory, the ones that we were worried about. But what we did find is that we have lots of Norway maples. We have lots of soft maples. So like other maple species that are not normally considered strong wooded trees. And so we can see those trends with when we start counting all of them. If we give them all a name, we can kind of determine our population. And that value is helpful in making management decisions. And so one of those decisions that people are looking at now, like with Emerald Ash Borer, is that a friend of mine just finished her grad school, her master's degree, trying to figure out if it's worth treating ash trees and the increased value to the environment actually it was on campus at Michigan State. And what they found was that, even if they treat every 2 years to control Emerald Ash Borer, it still is less than 10% of the value of that tree in environmental benefits if they continue to treat it. So like having this big evaporative cooler that takes and sequesters carbon and cleans the air is way more important to MSU campus than the $200 it costs.
That's a good point. When I was leaving my previous job, we were in the middle of a tree inventory count, and Emerald Ash Borer was coming there. And
oh, you're welcome for that.
yeah, and the issue was, do we treat the trees do we remove the trees, or is there certain areas we can just let them die, like if they're in a more forested area? So knowing how many trees we have and where they were really helped us start getting a plan together for how to prepare to battle that, to say these trees we'll just let die. These trees are, let's try to save them, and these other trees, well, we don't have the money for it yet. So that was one thing.
That's a good explanation. Dana, do you want to jump in here and ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, I had just a few comments actually. I guess from my view, and it's a very small amount for inventory in that budget, but it seems like I think we should have more of a bias towards action rather than administration, knowing every detail of every little tree. Could it not be something as simple as, and maybe we are getting towards the point where we do need a half-time on-staff arborist or something like that. But to have somebody just go around and look at the trees instead of, trying to make notes. And then I think it's also a little simplistic to value a tree just based on how big or old it is. And I think the same thing kind of applies to, we're missing some things, on how much maintenance a tree needs. Throughout a tree's life cycle, it'll have greater and lesser needs. Like, I think almost the greater needs of trees are when they're first getting started and they need that really good watering the first 2 years. And I think that's something, there's examples all over town where we put trees in. Those trees on Main Street, the Renker trees, look terrible at the end of the year because the gator bags weren't kept filled. So that would be a case of where, there is more maintenance needs early on, even though it's a small tree, small caliper, whatever. I think also the same is true, and I hate to keep harping on this about what we're doing at the tree bases. If you look at Shea Park and all those trees that, may have irreparable damage done, or the trees on Soul Street, that was a time where, maybe it would have paid to, do some type of a ring of mulch around it or something like that. Then trees go through just a whole long period where they may not need that much, but just an eyeball check once a year maybe is all you need, rather than trying to do an in-depth inventory with sizes and then basing, a budget on how big or old the tree is, really, when the small trees, in some ways, need more hours and time than the older ones.
I have an opinion on some of that, and some of it's purely just personal preference, but a lot of it's based on experience too. The inventory data, and I think Victor mentioned this and so did Ben, the inventory data becomes really important when you have a legal situation where somebody removes trees they're not supposed to remove, and you have to have a credible value. And even though sticking a price tag on something based on how big it is and how old it is, which is a simplification of what the valuation process is, even just doing that much and having it documented gives you a better legal standing so that you can win back the value of that tree when you go after it from the person who cut it down. And I also think that as an advisory board, it's our role to support planning. We have to be the visionaries that have a more than 1 year view of what's going on out there. And the inventory is the way to say, this is what we have, and therefore this is what we need.
I'd like to add something to that and what I wanted to say earlier. I think that we're not doing enough to talk about this as an asset. I mean, this urban forest is an asset that we have. And I think that's part of the outreach is, telling people that this is a big asset for us. It's part of what we use to apply to be a tree city. This is the value we have as this town. And so, it's justification for the cost of actually maintaining what we have, but this is a big asset, just like the city hall is, just like any building the city owns, just like the parks are, that we have to recognize is a major asset. So, I mean, if we got, hundreds of trees that we've inventoried, that's a big asset. What is the value of that? Can we say what the value is? I don't think we want to spend the time doing that, but, maybe it's an estimate, but we need to let, like, even city council, because you're involved in this, but this is an asset that we have that we can't dismiss as something that just naturally is going to happen on its own. And that also calls attention to the residents who think they can just cut down any tree, even though it may not be their tree. It's an asset that we have that we don't want people to damage. We want to maintain it.
Well, we see more and more conflicts where people have feelings on what city trees should be worth because they interfere with something that they want. And we see more and more litigation about not wanting to look at this or look at that, and trees can be part of that conflict. And so having an idea of what that value is gives us ammunition to deal with it. I would say that I do agree with Deanna that, you know, some of the most formative times for dealing with young trees is when they're small. And part of that, you know, the training and stuff like pruning and training and watering, that would all be part of those wages, is dealing with those young trees and the smaller trees more likely. The investment that we're really trying to look at is that if we take care of them when they're small, they become less expensive as they get older and are worth more money.
So maybe when Victor presents this, when he talks about that big top line number of $60,000, he points out that this is the money that helps us maintain the value of what we've purchased. When we purchase new trees and put them in the ground, we have to have this money because otherwise that's money wasted. And the people who've donated their money don't get anything for it if we let these trees die every year. We've got to be on it to water them and keep the gator bags full and et cetera.
Yeah, and it's going to take people to do that.
So I think that's a good way of phrasing it. The wages help that line, sorry, Ben, just real quick, that helps us maintain our value. The inventory stuff, that helps us, and consulting helps us understand the value. So,
yeah, and I would say that, you know, those types of things are things where we can use that training and outreach budget to train somebody on staff. I mean, if you think about like the actual labor burden and you look at $60,000, by the time you include taxes and insurances and whatever compensation the city would include in that for somebody that's making $15 to $20 an hour, that's one person. You know,
So you're saying that part of the training and outreach line item on here also addresses what Dana's brought up about trees not being properly cared for.
Well, that's exactly what it's for. And then I would just include that for some of that stuff to be open to the public if we have some other people that are curious and would like to, you know, have interactions. I mean, some of our best interactions are people that are, you know, that are engaged and involved and care about this and they want to know more about it. And if we're already doing some kind of presentation about pruning and they can meet the people that they see every day, I think it might be a good idea. They might be shy too and say, I don't really want to deal with the public.
I don't want to really get away from the details of the budget necessarily, but I did look at the city budget, you know, proposed 22 in 2021. And anything that I saw identified as something allocated towards trees totaled about $71,800. I know there's probably other line items that weren't identified as trees. And I was wondering, when I look at this total cost of 96 versus 71,000, well, that seems like an increase. And I'm not probably comparing apples to apples because I just identified the one section, you know, tree trimming was 63,000 or 43,000, and trees and bluffside management was 28,500. You know, those are the two areas I identified. So I was trying to relate that to this proposed budget.
I'll explain a little bit of that too. So you look at the general fund, a lot of, for example, my time for the tree board and tree issues has to go somewhere. So you're talking about wages of, you know, I'll probably spend, you know, this is not actually any physical work, it's administrative work. So you're talking about, you know, a few $100s a week being allocated for tree stuff just from the city manager's budget. So that gets distributed over things. So that's, you know, you get some thousands there, and, you know, there's a lot more to like bluffside management. So that's not just about, you know, the trees. There's a lot more that goes into that as well. But those numbers, the way we distribute those numbers are our best guess as possible because we don't have our DPW folks or our parks folks fill out a timesheet saying I did 1.5 hours today of trimming trees. I did 45 minutes of mowing lawn. We distribute that based on historical trends and our best guess of where the time is going. So it's really hard for when it comes to labor to really get an exact number of what they're doing.
Victor, I just had a question. Are you looking at moving the wages for tree trimming out of like the electric department into a separate budget for trees?
Nope. The budget's going to stay the same layout design as it is. Electric department is they
they get charged for when they're trimming trees for utility purposes, and that doesn't go to the general fund.
So that is not reflected. This is other tree trimming,
Yes.
like not those tall pines you were just
Right.
talking about. That wouldn't be under our budget. That would be under electric's budget.
Some of the tall pines made, some of that cost, which we estimate to be about $50,000, we don't know, it could be less, would be to the general fund, because the risk of those trees falling is not just damaging utilities, it's damaging road, fences, and city infrastructure as well. So we would distribute that cost between both electric and general, based on what we think is fair.
So there's kind of two budgets then for tree trimming, one that would have to do.
No,
with-
there's not two budgets. There's a separate budget for electric department and a separate budget for a general fund. They're separate funds.
Okay. So what we're showing in
And
Ben's
here-
report then is the general fund stuff?
Yes, primarily general fund. Some training and outreach might go to the electric crew, but they're not trimming a tree for the tree's sake. They're looking first and primarily at the utility. So they don't have as much leeway to do things as nicely and properly perhaps as we would like it to see.
So have we presented a proposed tree budget in the past?
No, I don't think we've
Okay.
explained tree
Yeah.
to the council in the past.
So for this, because there are people like Karen who will do their homework on the budget, and people like Nancy who don't understand how to put this in context, a big part of the presentation is to those points we talked about where Ben says this is less than a homeowner would invest given the similar value resource. And this is the first time we've tried to pull these numbers together. And it's an estimate, and I mean, context seems important in presenting this.
As part of that too, Sue, I wondered how this proposed tree budget compares to the reality of 2021. I mean, if you had to pull those numbers together, would it be the same as 96, or would it be like the two items I identified in the budget would be 71,000 approximately, or, I mean,
So at the end of the year,
I'm just curious, would you guess?
as a propose, I don't know, I can't give you a guess. Nick will propose, when he does the proposed 2022 budget, he also provides council with an amended 2021 estimated actual budget. So he will have those numbers available before the council meeting to show what we actually spent on that year. And a lot of things could affect that, but generally it stays the same. Generally, we're in the ballpark.
Okay.
I have another question about inventory.
Yeah.
My question is, isn't this an area where there's a fair amount of grant support available?
We can get a one-time fund matching grant from the state so yes, we could ask Kevin Sayers for state money.
So DNR, or where does it come from?
Yeah, for the DNR urban forestry grant,
Yeah.
which actually is a federal grant. which
That's
has been
the-
given us.
Forest Service, state and private forestry money that's passed through, federal money that's passed through to the states specifically for the purpose of the states supporting municipal in the forest. So the 5,000 there could be the match for a state grant that would get us 2 years' work for 1 year's
Or 5.
funding. Yeah,
I think that grant is a one-time $20,000 for that purpose.
are we well positioned to make use of something like that? And would we try to do that this year or next year? What would be involved in, because I mean, getting the grant is one thing, but using it is another. And
Well, we want to, do it. I mean, and so like that kind of leads into a couple of other things I want to say about inventory, which is that one of the things we have to do is be qualified to make assessments on tree quality, health, structure. And those all, I mean, I don't think it's as simple as just having a city employee run around and look at that stuff. They would have to educate themselves. I mean, becoming a certified arborist would be the minimum, but like then from there are other things like tree risk assessment, qualifications, and there's other certifications that probably they should have if they're doing those things.
unless we contract with somebody who does that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's essentially what I
Davy
do.
Tree to.
Yeah, I mean, either Davy or us or Bartlett or there's a couple other companies
Is that what the consulting management line item is for the $12,000?
That's for answering questions about like the management of the tree resource. And,
Is
you know,
that
bluff
through
issue.
asking you or somebody,
Yeah,
another
yeah.
contractor? I'm just curious
Well,
what that.
I mean, in the past, it's been me. So like if there's a question about like tree health on bluff sides or, you know, forest progression, if we remove a certain percentage of forest or something like that, or tree selection or, you know.
Vegetation management policy, when you do the reports for us, those
Yeah.
can come in that perspective.
You know, I mean, so like all those things that are not, directly related to disease control or inventory would be all in that area. And then, you know, we have other people that talk about this stuff sometimes too. I mean, like, you know, we had hydrologists that deal with the bluff side management. So,
Yep.
but the other thing I was gonna say about inventories, it's important is that, you know, that we can't hide behind governmental immunity for everything. If a tree branch falls on somebody's car and destroys it, then the question is gonna become, well, who should have known better? And we don't have to show that every single tree in the city is safe. What we have to show is that we made reasonable attempts to protect the public. And so one of those things is assessing what we own, understanding what our liabilities and our strengths are, and then expending a reasonable budget to try to deal with that. So we don't have to get every, you know, defect in every tree cut out to make sure that the public is, or to reduce our liability. What it means is that if we have a budget for doing that, we have to show that we exhausted that budget. And one thing that's really important about having numbers like this that are regimented is that if we show that we can pull money from anywhere for any reason, then that really sets the stage for somebody suing the city and saying, well, you've got to keep pockets someplace else. Your tree budget is flexible. If we say we've got $60,000 and that's all we have, and we stick to that until council changes that, then that really protects us a little bit more legally. And that would actually be something we want to talk about.
And I do want to say that when you look at that budget, for example, I would say the vast majority, I don't have a percentage, but I guarantee at least 80% plus is all related to trimming and removing trees. It's very little is focused on, you know, the watering, the consulting, the training, the outreach. It's mostly when we're trimming trees and removing trees and things like that. So.
And that a lot of that's aimed at hazard trees, identifying and getting ahead of hazard trees so they don't damage private property. And
We do that all the time. That's when a DPW spots something and they're like, all right, or a resident calls us and says, there's this funny looking tree on the right of way that's looking like they're gonna fall on my porch. We go out there and make an assessment and either trim a branch or take the tree down. I mean, that's the way it is. And that costs.
I have a question. Are we just keeping track of our trees through like the benchmark satellite imagery thing, or are we actually putting tags on them?
We have tags on them.
But we have had tags in the past. The problem with tags is that we don't have a way to keep the public from removing them. So probably 30% of the tags we put up every year or every cycle, they get taken off. And that's one of the reasons why we started using GPS to record this, is just because that way we've got a planting site that has a number on a computer, and if somebody steals the tag, it's kind of irrelevant. And then also when we change trees, like a tree dies or a tree's removed and then it's planted somewhere, you know, whatever that is, we have to replace a tree in a spot, we can change the tree. We don't have to pull the tag off and nail it to another tree. And the tags are temporary. I mean, the nails break off eventually anyways.
yeah, and that's just best practice in the industry
Yeah.
as well. There are a lot of really interesting things being done in terms of collecting, recording, and using inventory data. And that's maybe a topic if tree board gets real interested in it, where you could have somebody like Kevin Sayers come in, or Davey Tree, if you want something really slick, to come in and show you all the bells and whistles of inventory. But there's some neat stuff there, and it does also set you up well for asking for grants. When you go after funding to do something, whether it's expand the forest or improve the forest, you have to first say what the forest is. And the people reading those grant applications are familiar with what is possible with an inventory, and they expect at least the rudimentary data from you about what you have.
So I think I have the information I need, like as far as what's what you guys think are the big deal. But I guess what I'm gonna really ask here is, Ben, you have one more thing that we didn't really talk about in this proposed budget, that's replacement cost of $4,000 a year. Is that you're suggesting to replace trees that we remove?
We don't track what trees are dying. I mean, so as per Dan's earlier comment, we've got trees on Main Street that look pretty rough. And we really don't have natural regeneration in our forest. I mean, like, we don't have areas that are unmaintained that allow trees to come back. I mean, we mow parks. We have very specific sites where we have trees that grow and they have lifespans. And so, as we take them out, we should replace them. One thing that was kind of eye-opening when I was talking to Bert Craig on campus is that the rate of attrition for most cities is much greater than their rate of replacement. So like, they may start with an inventory that has lots and lots of trees, and then all of a sudden they say, well, we're 30% down in 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, and given that our tree plan states that our goal is to increase the tree canopy of the urban forest in Harbor Springs, this is something that we have to, just being consistent with what our focus is, we have to advise that money gets spent on replacement.
Well, I think we have to be realistic about how plants work, right? When you look at a big tree that's in a park, and it maybe wasn't a park 100 years ago, that's really the result of hundreds, if not thousands, of other trees dying. You may get one or two really big trees and have lots and lots and lots of offspring that never made it that far. And even if we do really good stewardship and try to make the best conditions, which we're really kind of trying to balance the maintenance costs to make sure that it's the most effective but least expensive, we're still going to have mortality, and if we have that, we have to replace those individuals. Otherwise we have a negative number and we lose that benefit.
Is that exclusive of the tree donation program? So anybody that might donate a tree would not donate a
That should
tree
be
to
an addition
replace an
to-
old tree? Or, do we have stipulations in terms of where the donated tree might be used? Can it replace an old
So-
tree?
Yes, we can replace old trees with donated trees, and we've done that before, but it's not necessarily the same location, and it's not, I don't think, not nearly at the number or the rate that would replace trees that we're removing. Lucas calls me probably every couple of weeks that there's a tree here, a tree there that we need to remove.
That'd be another bit of context that'd be good to add in the presentation. How big is the donated tree program? How does it compare to this budget? Why do you still need the money for replacing trees if you've got the donated tree program? And how is it different when the city goes out and buys a replacement tree versus when we're planting because somebody has donated?
Nancy?
I do, because I have a different hat on from tree board for you, because I think you're going to hear some of this, I think the goals are good in the tree plan, but I think we also have to be practical. Financially, especially at this point, we have to be practical. It sounds great to say, every tree that we take out, we need to replace. Well, that would be great, but it's probably maybe not possible to do that all the time in terms of budget items. So I just think tree board needs to be aware of that.
Sure.
Council's going to get asked from a lot of different areas, especially this year, for money, and they're not going to be able to do all of it. So we need to decide what the really important things are, I think, for trees. Is it maintaining the ones that we have so that we can expand their life as much as we can? Realistically, I understand they have a lifespan. And I just think we need to be careful to ask for something that's possible.
Sure, and as advocates, I don't feel too apologetic about asking for the whole ball of wax, but it sounds like you're saying it would be smart to also know what the fallback position is.
Right.
If you had to do without something in that budget, what could really go or wait
Or what could not be added is more so than what we have to take away.
Well, but I think that's what Victor needs to sort out for council, is to say this isn't about a new budget
Right.
of money that we haven't spent before. This is
Yeah.
presenting the information about how we've spent the money before.
How it's spent.
And if there's anything in this that's really starting in a new direction, it is X, and we want to do that because.
I think that there's.
I understood you to say, Victor, that this should be pretty comparable to what we actually spent in 2021 from first estimates. It's not an increase.
Well, there will be, I would say there will will be some increases and shifts in the budget because we're gonna be reducing some things and then starting to focus on maintenance of everything, maintenance and preservation of buildings, trees, park grounds. So I am gonna request shifting money to tree maintenance. And some of that may be maintenance, like literal maintenance and pruning and education for that stuff. Some of it might be for starting to understand our inventory because you can't maintain what you don't know you don't have. I mean, we've done this with like our electric utilities, with our street utilities. We have to do it for the state requirement for inspecting our water mains. We have to get not our water mains, but the connections to each house. So we're doing an inventory basically of that and trying to understand what kind of condition those are in. So this is common in all other parts of city government. The fact is that we do start an inventory with trees and we haven't done anything since then with it. So I think it's going to be a combination of a few of these things of maintenance, of inventory, and probably some more training and outreach. I don't think we, can't go for, replacements and all this other stuff, but we need to start somewhere.
And that's really what I'm saying, is that,
Make sure that the budget is understood for what it is. Is it a
Right.
bare bones replica of what we've done in previous years? Is it starting off in new directions? What's the context?
because that's gonna be a hard sell, if you will, this year, not only for tree board, but across the board, it's gonna be a hard sell right now. So,
Yep.
we are exploring new revenue sources, which is exciting and great, but we also are gonna have to make cuts.
Yep.
And so we need to identify what's the most important on this that we really, really have to do. And what can maybe wait a year or two, because I think that's where council's gonna go with a lot of stuff. It's just, so, I think maintenance myself is probably the most important, is to try and maintain to the best of our ability what we've already have. And then take a look if there's anything else we can do. I certainly think some outreach is important, listening to you all about all the legal aspects of things. Part of that is because people don't understand what the city trees are and what are their trees. We see this all the time, especially where there aren't sidewalks that divide it, that people don't have a clue that tree is on a city right of way.
Controversy.
We have people planting it all the time that we have to go back and say, that's city right away, you can't plant there. Well, they didn't know that because there's no sidewalk. So I think the education aspect, not necessarily for the tree board, but it certainly falls somewhat under it, is really important.
Yeah.
To avoid some of the liability stuff of people messing with city trees when truly they don't even know that they are. Or that they should.
That's helpful. That's really helpful. I do have a meeting at 1, so I just want to wrap this up, see any other comments before I go, but I think I generally have idea of where I'm gonna go to council with some of the shifts. I will say that this is an ongoing process of trying to understand our budget and how we do things related to trees. I appreciate Karen, you looking at that, but it's not black and white, some people will think it is black and white, but it's not. There's a lot of-
Great, well, good discussion. Thank you, Victor and Ben, for the preparation you put into this. Dana, thanks for making the effort to be with us by phone. It's good to have you part of this discussion. And with that, I believe we're adjourned.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Safe travels, Dana.
Safe.
Anna, have a good trip.
Fun in Texas.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.